Hello, well I'm standing here at the edge of the exercise yard in the former Gloucester prison with Vicki Levick, who was residential governor here for 15 months before the prison closed. Behind us is the old gatehouse, and the old and the new buildings are all around us as Vicki comes back to the prison for the first time since it closed. Vicki, how did you feel when you were appointed residential governor here?
It was a great pleasure and a great pride for me too, actually. My family's local, and my grandfather actually used to work as a prison officer at HMP Gloucester, so to get to come back and be a governor, sort of something that was really at my roots, was a great. I was very proud to do that.
Something very much in the family almost, coming to work here.
Definitely, yeah.
And the history of the prison, of course, is a very long one, almost 250 years, but it makes it also a difficult prison to manage from the point of view of residential governor, I should imagine. What were your main challenges?
There were difficulties. The building that represented the biggest challenge. The cells are very small, it's not very well lit. We had cells without integral sanitation. That created quite a lot of difficulties, especially when you're sort of trying to make sure that people are treated with decency and respect.
No, it can't have been easy, and of course some of these problems have been flagged up for years in inspections, and the limits of the listed buildings means that you couldn't exactly change the cells or their historic doors and the historic staircases and so on. What was your overall Governor Chantal King's approach to what you could do given the limitations of the prison?
Well, I think there was a lot that we couldn't do with regards to the physical building, but there was a lot that we could do with regards to the feeling, the sense of community within the prison. So a lot of what we tried to do was build a real sense of community, because a lot of people that have come to prison have actually been on the outskirts of community and haven't really sort of been part of a society. So what we tried to do a lot of was build that society within the prison walls. So we did a lot of things like peer mentoring schemes. We set up a new reception wing, a first night centre, so that when prisoners came in, they were given a lot of information about what it was to be in prison, because obviously with it being a local prison, a lot of people were coming here for the very first time. It's the very first time they'd stepped inside a prison, so it's a very daunting experience, especially considering we took young offenders. So if you're 21 years old, 18 years old, and coming into a building like this, first of all, it can be very intimidating. So a lot of what we tried to do was build a sense of society, build a sense of community and social responsibility really as well, and respect for others. And a lot of staff time was spent sort of teaching prisoners about all of this kind of sort of sense of community and how they can fit in, and hopefully then something they can take out into. So I mean, we did other things like we started releasing temporary licence here just before the closure. So we had a prisoner that was going out, working in a charity shop in the community, giving something back. We were running the community prison project, which was having lots of charities come in, work with men while they were here, and then also allowing men to go out and then continue work while they were out in the community. So while we couldn't do anything with the physical buildings, we could do a lot with regards to improving the sort of the social aspect of the prison.
And how important were the health side of the prison? You had a lot of health workers here, mostly from the mental health teams, who were helping you. How important were they?
They were absolutely integral to what we did. Obviously a lot of the offending was around drugs and alcohol misuse, so they did a lot of work with men around sort of dealing with their alcohol problems, not only from helping them overcome them, but also from the medical implications of long-term alcohol or drug abuse. So for example, long-term drug abuse can have real impact on dentistry, problems with heart, problems with breathing. There's all sorts of long-term difficulties that come with long-term substance abuse. So they were absolutely integral in doing that, and they also did all the through care stuff. So men that got picked up with issues in Gloucester prison would continue to get treatment out in the community, and that's something that perhaps they'd not been able to access, or had not chosen not to access before.
Now tonight, of course, in the History Festival, a lot of people will be listening to this who are also very interested in the whole history of the prison for the 250 years almost before you came. When you and the other governors were closing the prison down, Am I right that you found quite a lot of records of what had previously happened here, and that some of what you found was very different from the drug-related issues that you had to deal with?
Yes, we found an awful lot of old records, so everything from governor's logs. There was a book detailing all of the executions that happened at Gloucester. There were lots of old photographs and plaques, commendations, all those kind of things. So yeah, there was an awful lot of historical memorabilia that came up, and that's all been passed on to the Historical Society now.
Right. What was in the death log? Was it a description of the prisoners who had been executed and the crimes that they had committed? What sort of crimes had they committed?
There was everything really, from murder through to somebody that was executed for sheep rustling.
Stealing a sheep?
Yes, yeah. I think he was only 19 as well, the chap that was executed for that. So it was a great raft of offences that ended up getting a death penalty. The book itself was almost quite strange in its detail. It had everything from sort of who the executioner was, through to the weights of the individual prisoners, because then they had to calculate the drop from the weight. So it was almost sort of, it was a very cold book.
Almost macabre.
Yes, yeah.
And that must have been a very sad moment in a different way when you were going through the old records that you'd found, because you were effectively clearing the prison of everything that was here. When the news broke originally of the decision to close HMP Gloucester, how did you and your colleagues react?
First of all, it was a great shock. It's something that you never think will happen to your own prison, and we'd done an enormous amount of work, particularly around the community prison project. So we were shocked that after all that work that it was still going to close. The emotions were very difficult to manage. You had a staff group that, many of whom had worked for decades here, and sort of felt a very much a sense of self within the prison. It was a very close staff group, so that was difficult.
Well, I remember that period well, coming to see the governor and others here, and my sense was that things changed after a while, because the NHS family rallied round and everybody got jobs in different NHS departments or organisations, and once those on the prison side knew where they were going to work in the future, then people had a sense that they knew what their destination was, they had some certainty, and they could move on and focus on the difficult and quite time-consuming task within a short space of time of actually closing this prison down. Was that how it worked in practice, or was it more complicated than that on the ground?
There were more complications. Obviously, all individuals are different, and there were some people that found it harder to accept the closure than others. But generally, yes, once that initial sort of shock had worn off, and once everyone knew where they were going, and that sort of they were going to be either able to take the redundancy or able to move on to another establishment, then everyone did knuckle down and just get on with the job. That's something that you'll always find with prison staff, really, is that however difficult things get, at the end of the day they will knuckle down, they'll get the job done. So we had a very short time frame to get everything closed and decommissioned, and to decommission a prison doesn't merely mean to sort of sweep out the floors and close the doors. It means a total removal of all of the security, all of the beds, all of the tables, all of the computers, IT systems, CCTV. So there's an awful lot that is involved in decommissioning, and with a very, very short time frame, we had to just get on with it really and get it done.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on getting that job done so fast and so effectively. The prisoners were removed very quickly, and as you say, the staff problems were mostly resolved. But the final day when the flag came down, when we were all gathered here together just outside the main entrance, that was a day when I sensed the family of the prison did share a little bit of emotion. And of course there were some there who I presented the first ever long service medals to not long before. And the average term of service from some of your colleagues was really quite long, wasn't it? Yes. So it must have been an emotional day as well.
It was a very emotional day. It's very hard to see sort of an establishment where you've worked at for years and years and put an awful lot of your life into close. And I mean, the flag was lowered by Ian Hartwell, who was our longest serving member of staff, so that was very poignant.
Of course, you all leave with some mysteries behind. There have been lots of rumours of things that might have happened in the prison, or underground tunnels and so on. What mysteries do you think are left here today underneath the walls and the ground of the prison that we're standing in now?
Well, there's certainly a subterranean level underneath where we're standing. We've seen sort of the tunnels and stuff there, but really all you can see is sort of what's underneath the prison. Anything else is sort of filled up with rubble and things, so we're not entirely sure where any of the tunnels lead off to. So there's a bit of a mystery there. There's also lots of legends around sort of hauntings, particularly on A and B wing, up particularly where the condemned cells used to be. There's lots of rumours about ghosts that walk and sort of cold areas that you go into. So there's quite a lot of sort of mystery and magic to the place still.
Vicki, this has been a really good chance to catch up with you on your first visit back to HMP Gloucester. At the History Festival we'll have a lot of people who are fascinated by this collection of buildings that played such a role in the city over the last 250 years. It's obviously very different from your new prison at Ley Hill. What's the main contrast that you think people of Gloucestershire ought to know about the former prison in the city centre and the open prison where you now are?
I think there's an awful lot of difference between the closed and open estate. Obviously the open estate is the prisoners that are looking at going back into the community, so a lot of the work that's done there is about sort of reintegration, re-establishing family links, re-establishing community links. So we do a lot of work around getting people work out in the community and getting them back out to visit their families and all that kind of stuff. And obviously the security levels are a lot different between the open and the closed establishment. So that's probably the main difference between the two.
Well, thank you very much for doing this interview, Vicki, and I hope that you'll be able to join us on the evening in Blackfriars at the History Festival, where people who come will be able to ask Vicki their own questions. So we're now going to leave the gatehouse, leave the exercise yard, and head out of the former HMP Gloucester. Thank you very much indeed.